Good day, everyone, and especially to Ma'am Ivy Sanchez Diaz. I am Lady Miss Ramirez with my group mates, Gisame Luna and DC Rosendo, Evelyn Luna, and Miss Ethel Joy Ligo. We are now presenting our report entitled Philippines Political Killings, Human Rights, Peace Process. Over recent years, reports of an increased number of killings of political activists, predominantly those associated with leftist or left-oriented groups, have caused increasing concern in the Philippines and internationally. The attacks, mostly carried out by the unidentified men who shot the victims before escaping on motorcycles, have very rarely led to arrest, prosecution, and punishment of those responsible. Amnesty International believes that the killings constitute a pattern and that a continuing failure to deliver justice to the victims represent a failure by the government of the Philippines to fulfill obligation to protect the right to life of every individual in its jurisdiction. The organization is also concerned that the killings have played a major role in the breakdown of root-traced peace process and the accompanying human rights agreements between the government and the nation and the National Democratic Front or NDF representing the Communist Party of the Philippines or CPP and its armed wing, the New People's Army or NPA. Government and military officials insert that there is no state policy which calls or allows for extrajudicial execution, that there are no secret death squads, and no use by members of the armed force of hire killers. They claim that most of the killings were in fact carried out by members of the armed group themselves in the context of functional rivalries and internal purges. The government of the Philippines points to the comprehensive array of international human rights treaties which the Philippines has ratified, as asserts that in additional provision protection human rights are enshrined in the Constitution and ensured through national laws and institutions, including both an independent judiciary and the Commission on Human Rights. Historical background: armed conflict and human rights. Armed conflict between government forces and communist insurgents, primarily the CPP and NPA, has continued for over 35 years in the Philippines. Despite democratic reforms of the introduction of legal and institutional human rights safeguards following ouster of President Ferdinand Marcos in 1986, and a series of attempts during succeeding presidencies to move forward a peace process, fighting has persisted. Root cause sustaining the conflict include widespread poverty and economic inequity, poor governance including weaknesses in the administration of justice, violence of human rights, and impunity. In 1992, the then newly elected government of President Fidel Ramos announced a policy of national reconciliation and moved to revive the peace process with the NDF. The Anti-Subversion Act, which made membership of the CPP illegal, was repealed. Permitted negotiation with the NDF continued. The CPP-NPA was significantly weakened by leadership splits and the marked decline in the number of active armed fighters. The peace process, a human rights agreement of monitoring mechanism. During the 1990s, series of formal and informal negotiation between the government of the Republic of the Philippines or GRP and the National Democratic Front of NDF lead to agreement on the principles of framework for advancing a peace process. In the important step forward in 1998 as the first of a four-stage agenda Both sides included and signed a comprehensive agreement on respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. Through the agreement, both sides affirmed that they would respect and apply fundamental principles and standards enshrined with the international human rights law, including the right to life, the right to due process of law, and the right to freedom of thoughts and political beliefs, and within the international humanitarian law, including protection and human treatment of civilian and combatants not participating directly in the conflict, and the prohibition of the use of child soldiers.
So my task here is all about the state of emergency arbitrary detention of targeting of the life of a late February 2006 President Arroyo decided, which is 2006, decided a state of emergency 33 acting a conspiracy to overthrow the government members. By the way, ma'am, good morning. Government members of the molestation over the tactical alliance, rightist communist rebels of progressive opposition, and a group observing a forces military personnel. So here, it 2006 was President Gloria Arroyo. So in that time, she decided that armed forces means the military personnel would be one of the rightist communists of the progressive conspiracy that time. Under the powers of storming from the state of emergency, the president ordered the armed forces to prevent the supplies of forms of blue violence. It means to say the president ordered that time the violences, maybe the crime, all the crimes. Police enforced a ban on a public assemblies of following a raid, a newspaper, all-face police, threatened media outlets who failed to respect guidelines to relate to responsible reporting that the face being that shut down. So in that time, the media is very like as today, we usually use the social media or watch the TV in order to know the information about what happened to our society. In that time also, President Arroyo was ordered that must focus on violences of what happened in order to have a peace in the country. Philippines political killings, human rights, and the peace process almighty by international. The authorities arrested the face to shut down the media. Unlike today, we have many news that can see on television, radio, social media, as long as a news, not the fake news. That time, they shut down. Philippines political killings, human rights, and the peace of a suspect of the political spectrum accused of a rebellion or involvement in the reported group conspiracy. At least 25 members were detained. The military authorities and conspiracy suspension having a plan to attempt to force President Arroyo to resign. So in that time, many crises happened. So they want the president to resign. Maybe they don't like the rules, the regulation that time of Ms. Arroyo do. That's why they want to resign. Suspensions of having attempt to force President Arroyo resign by publicly announcing with the crowd of support from the president during the expected. Many people, not only one, but mostly all, publicly want. mass public demonstration, other officers were accused having conspired with the CPP and PE members to cooperate the elected co-op attempt. So the NPE also. However, the primary target of the government was the action to uphold the NPE. As we know, the NPE now is the violence. Yung NPE, yung tinatawag natin na mga tao na gumagawa ng hindi maganda sa ating bansa. Kinakalaban nila ang ating gobyerno upang gawin ang kanilang gusto. Was parties was explicitly accused by senior government officials of being front of organization of illegal communists. So they want the government to be part of the violence in their organization. Yung sabi ko nga, gusto rin nila na maging parte ang gobyerno sa kanila. Maging kabilang sa kanila upang kung ano yung mga gusto nilang mangyari, magagawa nila. That's called the illegal communists or armed groups. At February 2006, police lodged a rebellion complaint with the prosecutors against some 50 prominents. So that time on February 28, 2006, they want to against the prosecutors some of 50 prominents. Figures from across the spectrum to live, including the NDF, CPP leaders, exile leads of the leftist party list group unaddressed. And a serious blow to prospect of receiving confidence in the peace of process, the list of those accused. So, that one time, and a serious blow, prospect of receiving confidence of peace process. They want the peace. Maging malaya, magandang proseso kumbaga. Was substance comprised of person previously in agreement on safety, immunity guarantees, and the address of most suspect was cited as the Secretary of the Joint Monitoring Committee, CHERILL 40. Over subsequent months, it appeared increasing there that the authorities had decided to abandon the series of peace negotiations comprised of persons previously with the NDF. Rebellion changes were pursued against from prominent leftists formally granted to sit-conducted participate in negotiations on the view held by some military government officials that most membership of the CCP was tantamount of being CO conspirator with the NPE. Therefore, criminal act appeared to gain review strength, and Mayor General Jacinto Palparan describing the 1992 repeal of the Anti-Supervision Act. So many Republic Act, and this is the one of the Mayor Jacinto is in part. Because of many happening, the violences, they want to have as a mistake called for introduction of legislation that would criminalize the membership of the CCPP and sympathetic organization. President Arroyo and other government officials publicly reiterated a policy of all war. So in this is also by the help of the President and the government officials, the want of all to have a policy about the war, the crash of CPP and PE within the NDF leadership in the Netherlands to explore way of reviving the peace process was accorded to be the reason. They want to have a process in order to have a peace in the place where they want to have in. investigating an anti-communist with hand. That the policy of the military counter-emergency operators legitimate the military not counter of potential Operation Renew assumes the contributing killings leftist activists were the path of internal communists. The assumption of continuing the killings of leftist activists were in fact result of internal communist forces increased risk that responsible for the killings that would believe that they have received a signal. So there are many happens of that time, the killings, the violences. The country was very not good. Maybe they experiences the crisis that they want to fulfill that crisis, that they want to be in a good place that they want to. They want to do the crisis. Just as the killings, the violences that they had to receive the official of acceptances of the abuses. The abuses was the one of the crime that they want to quit these abuses, that they want to disappear of human rights. They want to have a peace of the rights of the people. Units to attack and exact revolutionary justice on the making mastermind operates believe that responsible for the political things and the killings and abuses of the violence that happened. Arbitrary detention and create of politically motivated charges. During the state of emergency, they also raised the concerns of political motivation behind reportedly arrest and launch criminal proceedings, particularly against the suspect. During the state of emergency, they also raised the political motivation behind an arrest and launch criminal proceeding against the suspect. So the suspect has time to defend of himself. He will explain to the court what she do that time. The time also of the anak pa was arrested. Congressman Crispin Beltran highlighted those concerned that he was reportedly surrounded by armed police. So in that time, when he was arrested, the armed forces, the police are there surround to him. On 25 February 26, he was outside on Manila and he was invited for questioning about PNP headquarters. With a 1985 warrant arrest issued by 21 years earlier under the President Ferdinand Marcos, asserting that would legally qualify 1998 as a second change was that brought forward accusing him or entitlement. So there is a process in suspecting someone by like a research warrant in order him to arrest. For statement, he alleged to prominent the made mask at the rally, but there is a video evidence to prove that isn't and that even he had spoken in publicly, such as even in congressional community immunity would apply in relation to such as change. Subsequently, he continued detention that would apply in relation by reported by a police investigation and to further rebellion change related to the reasons I'd like to group comparison in right elements to overthrow the President Arroyo. So, the police also arrested the suspension of a rebellion 5 other leftist Congress representatives including Sater Ocampo, Teodoro Casino, and Joel Brother of Bayan Mona Lisa, Masa Gabriela, and Rafael Mariano of Anak Pavis. The 5 appealed to the House of Representatives. So, So the 5 that arrested by the police against that they will not arrest. 5 appealed to the House of Representatives to grant them protective custody as a member of the legislative. As a man who shall them from immediate arrest without a court warrant. So the 5 remain So the 5 arrested legislative remain within the Congression confined over 2 months. We are investigating. While the investigation is there, the 5 legislative are there in confined over the 2 months. Continually, when a court ruled on the technically that the existing changes that should be dismissed over. However, soon afterwards, the Department of Justice for the rebellion changes against the 5 representatives. So after the investigation, the court decided that the 5 representatives are charges against the rebellion, that what happened, that they are not there is another suspect. So ayun nga, yung mga 5 legislative representative was nakalabas na at napawalang visa yung pinagbibintang sa kanila dahil wala naman silang kasalanan. Amnesty International remains concerned that during the state of emergency, the arrest threatened arrest of scores mainly against arbitrary arrest detention in Philippine law and procedure safeguarding against arbitrary arrest detention. Duty to protect the right to life. The right to life is a key of human right. According to the Article 3 of the Universal, the right to life is a key of human right. Declaration of Human Rights and provided for in Article 6 of International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which the Philippines is a state of party. Article 6, 1 of the CCPR provides, every human being has the inherent of life is none, which means that our life is one. Pag ito mawala, wala nang ipapalit. That means that strategy cannot kill even in times of emergency. Bawal kumbaga pumatay. The UN has developed detailed specific standards which not legally binding represent global agreement by states and now the best implement of international. So lahat naman talaga dito sa atin ay pinagbabawal ang pagpatay dahil nga ang tao ay may karapatan mabuhay. This includes the United Nations Conduct of the Law. So pati na rin ang sa ibang bansa ay pinagbabawal ito sa kanila dahil ito ay batas na imprisonment officials noon ngang 1979-61, the United Nations Principles on the Effective Preventions and Investigation of Extra-Legal Arbitrary and Summary Obligations and police and other law officers, including the obligation to firearms only and last resort when there is imminent threat to life. So alam naman natin meron talaga tayong gobyerno at meron rin tayong mga pulis na sila ang mga tumutugis sa mga taong masasama. Pero hindi agad sila papatay kapag ito ay hindi talaga dapat silang pumatay. Pera na lang kung kanilang pinagtatanggol ang kanilang sarili. Dahil meron rin tayong batas na ipinagbabawal ang pag-aabuso sa mga ganyang bagay. She is a member of kilusan ng pambansa para sa pabansang demokrasya or a movement national democracy. She was not at Resort Hotel, where she was participating in Province Water Farmers and Fisher Folk Conference in Barangay Gabon, Habuan District, Bataan for Province of Luzon. So, it Cathy Alcantara is one of the member of National Democracy. Irma Cathy Alcantara, according to the witness statement gathered by human rights group, including Task Force Detains of the Philippines or KPD members, after the Cathy had just left the resort having the chicken arrangement for the conference, two incidents, armed men on motorcycle open farm with 45 caliber pistol and these bullets passed through her neck and right breast before the attack, witnesses reported saying. Single motorcycle passed several times by the resort and another single motorcycle with two or three unidentified men parked in front around 6:30 a.m. Cathy away taken to Bataan Provincial Hospital by a nearby hardware store on, but Cathy died before the arrival. She was not survived by her husband, a farmers community organized, and their two children. After what happened to Cathy, there's many investigation that made the process. There's many procedure that happen, just like the man who parked. According to the witness, there is a man who parked and used the motorcycle. But until now, sad to say, problem is not unresolved.
Political killings, Bayan Muna, Anak Pawis, and Bagong Alyansang Makabayan. Bayan New Patriotic Alliance, including activists from a range of leafless, sectorial, or community organization. Leafist group who have split from the CPP, Kilusan para sa Makabansang Demokrasya or KPD, Movement of National Democracy. Both men and women have been targeted, including indigenous, priests, and workers. According to the local humans, these are regional plantation were allegedly assignment of Major General Palparan, a commendating officer. Mindoro Oriental 87, Eastern Visayas, and Central Luzon, including Bulacan, Pampanga, Bataan, and Nueva Ecija Province. 88. General Palparan has denied any involvement in such killings. Mythology of attacks and suspected perpetrators. First, predominant method is attack has been shooting by unidentified assailants like for riding tandem on motorcycle. Assailants are supported by other men or motorcycle nervy or unmarked bands. There's a lot of attacks were described as having carried out in a professional manners. According to reports, significant numbers of attacks have been preceded by the warnings and death threats. Following the athletes' activities in Northern Luzon 2005, leaders from the Bayan Muna Cordillera reported that they have been informed by sources within AFP that include on a military target. In this intensive or casing is a operation concluded on a military intelligence personnel. Threat of subsequent assassination attack by undefined men is markedly increased in this manner. Tarlac City Councilor Attorney Albelardo Nadea, 91, shot in the highway in the Central Luzon in 2005, as reported by NPA in region. Jose o Pepe Manigaig, shot dead in the Ilocos Sur in November 2005. Ineffective investigation and the climate impunity. Persecution and punishment break the cycle of a crime and impunity, protects the public from the culprits repeating their crimes and helps to defy others. Amnesty International is concerned at persistent reports that majority of investigations do not meet an international standard as set for the UN. The further concerned that the investigation has reportedly at the perpetrators is the further concern that this climate of impunity that has been allowed to persist since the presidency of President Quezon Aquino in 1966 and 1993 promulgated and a new constitution restored a democratic institution for protection of human rights. Amnesty International and other international and the national human groups is repeatedly expressed a grave concern that the convictions of state operators of the human violation including the extrajudicial executions. Present of failures has 1,509 cases of alleged human rights violations filed by the Philippines Commission on Human Rights before the court between 1987 and 1990. Amnesty International is concerned that the flaws within the administrations of justice that have a long underpinned and de facto climate of impunity, including investigations, reluctance of witness to come forward to fear. In 10 years, at least 390 criminals, mostly alleged by drugs pushers. In 10 years, at least 390 criminals in Davao, mostly by drug pushers, abusers, and petty thieves, including children on the streets. And the young gang members have reportedly been attacks were carried by undefined men or motorcycle. Police investigations have failed to lead of those responsible, and Amnesty International, national and international justice group have also expressed concerns at the high number of unsolved killings of journalists in the Philippines. At least 64 journalists are reportedly have been killed since 1986 as a result of their works, with at least 10 in 2005 and 9 in the 7 months of 2006. The conviction in November 2005 of former police officer responsible for the murder of 2002 of Edgar Damalerio and a radio journalist in Pagadian or Mindanao, victims of human rights violation and their families, particularly those from poor or marginalized communities. That's all, and thank you.
Now, we will talk about the 14th point of program for the prevention of extrajudicial execution adopted by Amnesty International in 1992. Extrajudicial execution are fundamental violation of human rights and an affront of conscience of humanity. These unlawful and deliberate killings carried out by the order of government or with complicity have been condemned by United Nations, yet extrajudicial execution continue daily across the globe. Amnesty International calls on the all government to implement the following 14-point program for prevention of extrajudicial execution. It invites concerned individual and organization to join in promoting the program. Amnesty International believes that implementation of this measure is positive indication of a government commitment to stop extrajudicial execution and to work for their eradication worldwide. Now, we will talk about the 14-point program for the prevention of extrajudicial execution. Number 1. Official condemnation. The highest authorities of every country should demonstrate their total opposition to extrajudicial execution. They should make clear to all members of the police, military, and other security forces that extrajudicial execution will not be tolerated under any circumstances. Number 2. Chain of command control. Those in charge of the security forces should maintain strict chain of command control to ensure the officer under command do not commit extrajudicial execution. Number 3. Restraint on use of force. Government should ensure the law enforcement official use force only when strictly necessary and only the minimum content or extent required under the circumstances. Number 4. Action against death squad. Death squad private armies, criminals, gangs, and paramilitary forces operating outside the chain of command but with official support or acquiescence should be prohibited and disbanded. Number 5. Protection against death threats. Government should ensure that anyone in danger of extrajudicial execution, including those who receive death threats, is effectively protected. For number 6, no secret detention. Government should ensure that prisoners are held only publicly recognized places and detention, that accurate information about the arrest and detention of any prisoner is made available promptly to relative, lawyer, and the court. No one should be secretly detained. For number 7, access to prisoner. All prisoners should be brought before judicial authority without delay after being taken into custody. Relative, lawyer, and doctor should have prompt and regular access to them. For number 8, prohibition in law. Government should ensure that the commission of an extrajudicial execution is a criminal offense, punished and sanctioned commensurate with the gravity of practice. Number 9, individual responsibility. The prohibition of extrajudicial execution should be reflected in the training of all officials involved in the arrest and custody of prisoners and all officials authorized to use lethal force and in the instruction issued to them. Number 10. Investigation. Government should ensure that all compliance and reports of extrajudicial execution are investigated promptly. Number 11. Prosecution. Government should ensure that those responsible for extrajudicial execution are brought to justice. Number 12 is compensation. Dependents of victims of extrajudicial should be entitled to obtain fair and adequate redress from the state of including financial compensation. For number 13, ratification of human rights treaties and implementation of international standards. All governments should ratify international treaties containing safeguards and remedies against extrajudicial execution, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and its first optional protocol, which provide for individual compliance. Number 14 is the last, international responsibility. Government should use all available channels to intercede with the government of countries where extrajudicial execution have been reported. It is the 14th point of program for the prevention of extrajudicial execution adopted by Amnesty International in 1992.
Case Study, Father William Tadena. Reverend Father William Tadena, 37 years of age, was killed shortly after 8 in the morning on 13th March of 2005. A parish priest of the Iglesia Filipina Independencia or IFI in La Paz, Tarlac, Luzon. He was attacked when traveling in his jeep with the 3 colleagues along the provincial highway from Barangay Guevara towards La Paz to celebrate his second Mass of the day. Father Tadenas was a chairman of the Human Rights and Social Concerns Committee of IFI Diocese of Tarlac, member of local chapters of the Promotion of Church, People Response and Karapatan. He was a critic of the owner of the Hacienda Luisita sugar plantation in Tarlac, and he also worked and supported other marginalized communities in the province. According to report collated by Bayan Muna and Karapatan, several identified persons with bonnet face mask were seen in the vicinity of Father Tadena's parish prior to attack. Subsequently, while Father Tadena drove along the highway near the IFI chapel, an identified person called him Father and waved at him to stop. When Father Tadenas slowed down, he sensed that it was an ambush attack. At the moment, one of the perpetrators fired 3 gunshots in his back and 2 more shots in his neck and head, and the motorcycle made an escape. The IFI parishioners took Father Tadena to the hospital where later on he was died. According to autopsy report, the victim suffered gunshot wound from a .45 caliber pistol in the back, neck, and head. According to the newspaper report, 2 months after attack, the Tarlac City Police Chief announced the suspect had been arrested in Mandaluyong City on the number of separate robbery and murder charges. The suspect, described as a former NPA that was later on reportedly identified by one of the Father Tadena's companions as one of the attackers. Amnesty International believes that effective protection of witnesses and the relatives of the victims must be priority element within PNP investigation efforts. A number of groups, including the Asian Human Rights Commission, have campaigned to ensure that witness protection programs in the Philippines are robust and effective Amnesty International shares their serious concerns that the implementation of the relevant legislation, the Witness Protection, Security and Benefit Act RA 6981, fails in practice to ensure the safety of witnesses under the Act. The Department of Justice is empowered to deliver a program of protection to witnesses to grave felonies, including secure housing facilities, relocation, or change of personnel identity, the assistance of obtaining a means of livelihood. The law also provides that the Court of Investigating Authority shall assure a speedy trial, where a witness admitted into a program shall testify and shall endeavor to finish the proceeding within 3 months for the filing the case. However, as noted by the Ateneo Human Rights Center, the reality is the most cases take for longer than 3 months, not least because of the postponements usually requested by the accused and the length of time that the Supreme Court takes deciding change of venue petitions for the protection of witness. More witnesses are protected to lack confidence in the program and fear that given prolonged delay in criminal proceedings, it will not be able to offer protection to them or their families, which may be needed to extend over years. As described earlier, Article 6 of ICCRP, which provides for the right to life, further state that no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his life. In order to effectively combat patterns of politically motivated extrajudicial execution and another unfold killings in the Philippines, the government has a clear duty to consistently condemn and prohibit all such killings to ensure each is thoroughly and independently investigated, to bring suspected perpetrators to justice, and to ensure reparations to victims. As stated in 2005 by the UN Special Rapporteur and Extrajudicial Summary or arbitrary killings, these duties lies on the authorities in relation to killings by non-state actors. In addition, the special rapporteurs state that the crimes, including murder, carried out by individual can also give rise to the state responsibility in instance where the state has failed to take all appropriate measures to deter, prevent, and punish the perpetrators, as well as address any attitude or conditions in society which encourage of facilities such crimes. Essential part of due diligence of the part of the state and the crucial component in the battle against impunity is the conduct of effective investigations which lead to execution and punishment of perpetrators of extrajudicial killings. The UN Human Rights Committee responsible for monitoring complies of state signatories which obligation under the ICCPR identify this as among its principal subjects of concern after considering the periodic reports of the Philippines in October 2003. Amnesty International shares this conviction and urge the government to address the problem of inadequate investigations and prosecutions in the Philippines. This is particularly urgent in relation to the continuing pattern of conclusions. Unearthing the evidence, establishing responsibility for the current pattern of political killings will take political will. It will require political determination and persistence practical efforts to undo the legacy of impunity, which has the potential to undermine efforts to hold perpetrators of political killings accountable, and is aided by the assumption that such killings are to some degree unacceptable byproduct of continuing armed conflict. While it will take sustained effort to unravel the chronology of events that lead each attack, the establish the fact consisting every political killing and establish whether there was an official chain of command underlying both the crime is cover up. Effective, robust measures are necessarily to protect those who can forward to assist the case. Unless these steps are taken, the coercive impact of political killings will continue, and hopes for a just and lasting peace, as outlined in the government's 2004 to 2010 peace plan, will remain unrealized. However, the struggle for respect for human rights fought with high cost from the time the President Marcos and reflected in the 1986 Constitution of the Philippines, ratification of international human rights treaties is facing a serious challenge. Within the context of all-out war against communist insurgent, the rising incidence of political killings risk a retaliatory spiral of killings by armed groups. The need is pressing for both sides of the conflict, supported by all sectors of civil society, to assert and commit to renewed respect of human rights. Recommendations. In 1993, Amnesty International adopted a 14 points program for the prevention of extrajudicial execution based on the United Nations principle on the effective prevention and investigation of extralegal, arbitrary, and summary execution. If adopted and fully implemented, the organization believes this would effectively combat the practice of political killings and impunity for those who commit them and ensure reparations to victims. While, in light of the immediate threat of further political killings and other human rights violations in the Philippines, Amnesty International highlights below a selection of key recommendations grouped under four headings addressed to the government of the Philippines, other national and international institutions, and armed groups. Lastly, Amnesty International believes that joint concerted action to fulfill these recommendations, actively supported and encouraged by religious, media, business, and other groups within civil society, is required. Only then can the condition be created in which respected for their human rights become the foundations for the building of a just and lasting peace.